Once again, good morning. I woke up this morning and got outside and thought, this is going to be a tough sell on a day like this. Come indoors and sit and let's talk about death. So I appreciate that you are all here today. Give very high marks. There's a Buddhist story of a young mother whose son has died in infancy. And the grieving mother is unable to accept that her son has died. And so she's carrying the body of the child from household to household in her village. And she asks each person, she says, my child is sick. Can I have some medicine to make him well again? And the villagers realize that the woman is lost in her own mind. And one of them eventually takes pity on her and says, go to the Buddha, and the Buddha will help you. So she goes to where the Buddha is, because everyone knows where the Buddha is. And she takes the body of the child to the Buddha, and she asks for some medicine to make her son well. And the Buddha says, bring me a mustard seed borrowed from the hut of one of your neighbors, but it must be a special mustard seed. It must come from a home that has never known death. Not the death of a parent, a brother, a sister, a child, or a friend. So the woman goes from hut to hut in her village, asking each person for such a mustard seed. But everywhere she goes, the people tell her they can't help her. Alas, my brother died 2 years ago in an accident working in the fields. I'm sorry, my mother died last winter. She had a long and beautiful life. We miss her so much. Young woman, I can't help you. My friend was killed in the war. He was the best man I knew. So everyone she meets, their life has been touched by death, and they share their stories with her, stories of grief and loss and joy and fond memories and the passage of time. And finally she understands that her story is the human story. And she takes her son and she buries him in the forest, which is the custom of her people, and she rejoins the living. Unitarian Universalist minister the Reverend Forrest Church says, religion is our response to being alive and having to die. And here we are in a house of religion this morning, and our subject is indeed this business of having to die. And what do we make of it, and what do we do with it? So I want to start with the obvious point, which is that no one knows what happens after we die. I don't know. You don't know. It is the great mystery that we all pass into, and to date, no one has been able to convincingly report back. And Unitarian Universalism doesn't claim to have any special revelation. We don't say we have any privileged information as to what happens once we pass through to the other side of that curtain. We are a life-focused religion. Our emphasis is on the here and now. Convictions about death are not built into our worldview. We sometimes say we are interested in life before death. Now, this differentiates us from, for example, Christianity or Hinduism, which do have very strong ideas about death built into them. But it doesn't make us unique among religions. The Buddha reportedly discouraged his followers from wasting time on these kinds of speculations, which he thought were sort of unknowable and not where you should be focused. Judaism has many different ideas about the afterlife, including its possible non-existence. And Judaism, like us, is much more focused on this life. For myself, I'm a believer in the reality of death, and that death represents loss. Whatever happens after I die, and I have no idea what happens after I die, but whatever happens, I don't expect my personality to survive, or my memories, or my awareness of my historical self. In that way, whatever happens after I die, there is loss. Once upon a time, I think it was reasonable to picture the self as a sort of immaterial, thinking, feeling, remembering being sort of floating around inside our body, such that it could survive intact without our body. But my personal opinion is that we know too much now about the way the brain and the body create our mind and emotions and the way our memories are stored inside the structure of our neurons, to think that all of that exquisite physical machinery is just superfluous. That it could be destroyed, and yet all the thoughts and memories and feelings that it housed and activated could survive without them, as though it is unneeded. And so I expect that when I die, Jamie Hinson-Rieger as a person will cease to be. Whatever else lives on, and we'll talk later about what I think does live on. Now that said, many people do claim to have experienced or witnessed their survival of the self beyond death, to have interacted with or even communicated with the personalities of people who have died, and we honor their own personal experiences. I don't discount those experiences, even if I don't find them myself ultimately persuasive. I file them under, it's a mystery. It's the greatest mystery. When my grandmother, who was a devout Catholic, died the year before last Christmas, her funeral was naturally a Catholic funeral. And the young priest who was doing our funeral, when he met with our family out front, because he meets with you beforehand to discuss the funeral and what's going to happen, he came out with his arms kind of extended and this big smile, like, this is my favorite kind of funeral. And we were a little bit taken aback. And he explained that sometimes I come out here and the family is so distraught that I question a little if they're really secure in their Catholic faith. Do they understand that Grandma has gone on to a new life in heaven? But he could tell that we were very strong in our Catholic faith, so that was his favorite kind of humor. So I was a little bit offended by this. Like, do we seem breezy about Grandma's death? Do we seem casual? We don't have cocktails in our hand. And as an aside, most of us were not, in fact, Catholics, but that's neither here nor there. But the service of the funeral echoed that theme, that my grandmother had not really died, that she would be resurrected, that she would be given an incorruptible body, given eternal life, was already living a new life in heaven. The theology is, I don't quite understand it completely, but that this was a time for celebration because grandmother was still alive in the most important sense. And it left me a little cold, to be honest, because it felt like it was denying the reality of death. And I believe in death. I believe in its reality and the fact of its loss. And what needed ministering in me at that time was the fact of its loss. And so, although there is much that I admire about Christianity and its message of love, compassion, and acceptance, the equality of all people in the eyes of the eternal, when it comes to death, I'm not a Christian. The Buddhist story of the mustard seed does contain that acknowledgement of the reality of death as this universal fact of human existence. And the Buddha teaches sort of a twofold response. The first is to find peace in acceptance. Buddhism is very grounded in psychological realism. We ought not want that which is not possible. And in this case, to be free from loss, to hold on to things forever is not possible, and so we ought not want that. And rather than struggle and rail against the reality of change and loss, we should accept these things, because otherwise we are unnecessarily multiplying our pains. Pain at the loss itself, compounded by our pain at the unfairness of the loss. The Buddha said, as all earthen vessels made by the potter end in being broken, so is the life of mortals. Therefore the wise do not grieve, knowing that these are the terms of the world. While I admire the realism and practicality of Buddhism, and very much do believe we should cultivate a practice of acceptance, I question the ultimate goal of Buddhism, or at least my understanding of the ultimate goal, which is certainly imperfect, that we are to seek to escape from suffering, particularly through the practice of non-attachment. My understanding is that we are counseled to recognize that nothing permanently belongs to us, but that things and people pass in and out of our lives. And it is supposed that if we were to accept this with the right mindset of equanimity and non-attachment, we could love people when we have them, let them go when they are gone, and in this way avoid suffering. I can't see myself ever achieving that level of non-attachment, or necessarily even wanting to achieve that level of non-attachment, because I don't regard the purpose of religion to be escape from suffering. And I don't expect my acknowledgement of death to protect me from suffering at the loss of it, or for those who love me when I die. So in that respect, I do not consider myself really a Buddhist in regards to my attitudes about death. We hope that when death comes for us, it will be like the Longfellow poem. Nature taking us by the hand, leading us to rest so gently, we go scarce knowing if we wish to go or stay. Having first taken our playthings, our responsibilities, and our earthly attachments away from us one by one, we would like death to arrive on schedule. Right? We hope that death will be a respecter of our plans, will at least in some small way be sympathetic to our priorities. Some people even live their lives in a sort of semi-frantic state of busyness, as though that were a guarantee of immortality. Can I possibly die today? Who's going to file the quarterly reports? Right? But death keeps its own calendar, and it cares nothing about ours. In 2008, the Reverend Forrest Church, who I've quoted a couple times here, was then at the apex of his ministerial career at All Souls Unitarian New York, which is a very big UU church in New York, and he had a very important position. And at the height of his career, he informed the members of his congregation that his esophageal cancer had returned, and that his time remaining with them would be allotted in months and not years. And in those last months, he wrote a memoir of his experience called Love and Death, My Journey Through the Shadow, which I recommend to everyone. And in Love and Death, he wrote, "The path of life is strewn with trapdoors. One day," he's retelling a story, "one day my children and I were almost killed crossing the street right in front of our apartment building. I was walking them to their last day of school, and 3/4 of the way across, with the light in our favor and dutifully holding hands, a car burst out of nowhere, hurtling around the corner at breakneck speed, ricocheting off the curb and swerving in our path. Missing us by inches, the car skidded, fishtailed back into control, and disappeared down the avenue. I could barely breathe. My children, in contrast, just laughed, romping blithely down the sidewalk, jumping from tree to tree as they always did, trying to touch the leaves." So church continues. Our lives are beset with trapdoors. Whenever the ground seems most secure, something out there has its hand on the lever. A coronary, a drunk driver, a vagrant cell multiplying secretly in our body. When a trapdoor springs, we haven't time for regrets or second chances. It just happens. Whoosh. No goodbyes. So my kids had the right idea. We had just escaped from a brush with death. Why didn't I think to jump up and touch the leaves? So acknowledging death can't protect us from pain and suffering, because nothing can do that. It hurts when we lose someone. It hurts terribly, whether they have lived a long, full life or whether they are taken from us suddenly and unexpectedly. And we cannot, in turn, protect our loved ones from the pain and suffering that they will experience when we ourselves must die. But while we are alive, we can protect them from the loss of wasted moments, petty evasions, shallow interactions, pointless grudges. We can jump up and touch the leaves together. We can bless them with the full reality of ourselves, shared fully, honestly, and bravely. We can take one another on adventures, crusade for justice, and risk for love. So the purpose of acknowledging death, I feel, of facing that reality, is to goad us not to squander the life that we have. It is to remind us how precious the limited time we enjoy is, to live in the now, love what we have, say what we need to say, and do good while we can. The purpose of making our peace with death is to empower us to live our lives fully, to really live our lives, because life involves risk. We should not, of course, be reckless and foolhardy, but neither ought we let our fears and self-protective impulses prevent us from living our life to its fullest potential. As the saying goes, boats are safest in harbor, but sitting in harbor is not what boats are for. So that is being alive and having to die. So finally, what of death itself and afterward? I want to close with an image that I presented a little over a year ago when I did a sermon on change and loss that encapsulates what I think about death and what does survive. When I think of the human experience, sometimes I picture it as a great symphony that has been playing since before recorded history, really since the infancy of the human species. And as you and I are born, we pick up our own instrument and we join in. Each one of us is playing the music of our own understanding and our own experience, but everyone is also playing off of everyone else as this sort of vast improvisation. We inherit at first the melodies that surround us when we are born, the melodies of our communities and our culture, the melodies of our families and our ancestors, and these may be the predominant notes we play our entire life, and that's okay. But as we age and grow, we also learn to unlock the music of our own soul. And as we play our own notes, maybe hesitantly at first, maybe more confidently, we can't know the destiny of the music that we are creating. We can't know what life our music will have in the great symphony, because it's not up to us. Maybe we sing our song for a while, and it is good and beautiful, and ultimately the song dies out. There will be other songs. It's okay. But maybe we play our notes and they get picked up in some other section of this great symphony. Maybe a few bars, or maybe just the sense of our sort of verb and attitude, maybe the swing of it, or maybe the entire melody is picked up down the line. And then, though we are no longer playing, still the music of our soul is echoing throughout the symphony, here and there, and the players who have been moved by it, who carry it forward and add their own inspiration. And in this way it spreads out throughout the entire piece, shimmering and vibrating. It's that sense in which I do believe that the end of our first life is the beginning of a second life, the life we live on in others as a resonance in the lives of all of the people that we've touched. It's a different us that lives on in that way. In some sense, it's almost a purer version of ourselves because it's been stripped of the random facts of our personality, our random likes and dislikes and our upbringing. It's the melody of our person. Not every note we play survives, but still the music of our soul, the melody of our soul, is echoing through the symphony, carried on by other players. And how long it sustains and how far the sound travels, no one can say. There are melodies that have been echoing throughout the symphony for generations, each one the unique song of a human soul. Perhaps they will fade someday, and perhaps not. But we each get our chance to play for however briefly. And for that time that we are playing, all of us playing together, we sustain the entire piece. And maybe we've reached a point where we feel we're not as sharp as we used to be. Maybe we feel that we're tired, or we're scattered, or we're worn down, or we're grieving, and our playing is a little bit off. But I believe if we are living each moment with integrity, then the richness of our soul shines through in our playing no matter what. In the last week of my grandmother's life, when her health and strength were failing, and her time was unmistakably drawing to a close, as one of her last acts on earth, she sent a birthday card to my daughter Claudia for her 18th birthday. She wrote the card out herself, she addressed the envelope herself, she stamped and mailed it herself. Because that's who she was. And that who she was survives. As we ourselves finally pass on into mystery, it may well be that it is the very last notes we sound that will echo on out through the symphony for generation upon generation, too many to be counted. Let us play with gratitude and integrity and love. Our closing hymn today is number 128, For All That Is Our Life.